And so thank you for inviting me.
You're listening to Cooper Talk.
Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guest. I got to tell you something, people. I'm friends with my guest on Facebook, and she has a really amazing resume of directing TV. And I was substitute teaching a while back, and there was a show on called Sid the Science Kid. And I saw her name in the credits, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm friends with her on Facebook. So I had to have her come on the show just because, well, besides her great resume, it's so cool because it was I was subbing for an autistic class, and they were really watching this and really into it. So I got to say, it's an honor to have her on my show. My guest is Katy Garretson. How you doing?
Hello, I'm well, thank you. And I love that you saw Sid the Science Kid. It was probably one of my favorite shows to ever work on. It just was a laugh riot. It was so creative, such talented people. I just had a blast. And it was educational. I felt like I was doing something, not like your regular old sitcom. I felt like I was doing something for the kids and for science. And, it was a PBS show. And we actually had a lot of PBS, their educational department involved. And it was to educate kids about science, which is so dang important these days. And it was a pleasure to work on that show all around.
And you did like 26 episodes of that. You did a lot of episodes.
I did I have no idea how many, but I did. Yeah, I did episodes over the course of 3 seasons. Not all 3 seasons, but the thing with kids shows is that they're capped at a certain amount of seasons because the kids grow out of them. And then the next generation of kids, it's for ages 3 to 7. So when the 3-year-olds get to be 7, they're moving on to other shows. And we got a whole new batch of 3-year-olds, and it's all new for them. So you never get super long-running little kids shows, preschool shows.
So I want to get in your career, but I want to start off with this question because, you've directed a lot of great sitcoms. And me and my wife were just talking the other day, and I talked to one of my guests last week, like CBS this year. No, ABC has like 2 sitcoms on the schedule. It seems like sitcoms are disappearing. And why do you think that is? And does that bother you? Because your roots are in that field, and like me too. I grew up watching sitcoms. They were like the lifeline of so many. If you're 45 and up, you grew up watching sitcoms. I'm 62, so I sat there. I watched them all the time. So I want to know your take on it, and why do you think it's happening?
Well, it's been happening over the course of, frankly, my entire career. I directed my first episode in 1999. God, does that date me? I don't think it aired until 2000, which was good. So at least I'm in this century. But, when I started directing, there were 35 sitcoms on the air. And now there's, like you said, there's less than a half a dozen of the traditional sitcoms. So when we talk about traditional sitcoms, we're talking about with a live audience, with multiple cameras. Almost always it's 4 cameras. And, it's shot like a play with real audience laughter. And, it's Frasier, Friends. Those are your traditional sitcoms. But there are also half-hour sitcoms that are single camera, and those became more popular in recent years. The Ted Lassos, it was, Sex and the City was really huge. That's what we started competing against in award seasons. Frasier did when I was on that. I spent 10 years on Frasier, so I refer a lot back to then. But a variety of factors contributed to the demise of sitcoms. Like I said, when I started, there were 35 or so on the air, and there was a lot of work to go around for everybody, and there was opportunities for new people to come in, and there were 22 episodes a season, sometimes 24, whereas now, even with the few sitcoms you have like, 10, 13, you don't have as many episodes usually. And like I said, there's a variety of factors. So first you had there was the initial writer's strike back in '07, I believe it was. And that's when the network started putting on all the game shows, all the news shows like Dateline, and all the reality shows, the Survivors and the Bachelor and Bachelorettes. And they realized they could have a huge audience on those shows. And, they didn't obviously play well in syndication, but it's all about the now here in Hollywood. And they realized they could, they didn't have to spend so much for the shows that were the scripted shows like regular sitcoms. So that took a chunk of the sitcoms away. It seems like more and more sitcoms do go away every time there's a strike in Hollywood. And it's not that I think that the strikes are bad. I think that too often they get blamed on the guilds and unions when there's a strike, when it's, they're striking for a reason. And it's always blamed on the creatives, but I think the blame should go the other way at least as much when there's a long strike, because the studios and networks and producers, they're the entities that just want to, it's all about the bottom line. They really disregard and disrespect the talent en masse during a strike. But anyway, so strikes contributed the surge of reality programming, whether it was American Idol to Survivor to all of these other stupid ones. And they took up a big chunk of prime time. And then our dramas really started to gear up. And where you used to have a Thursday or a Tuesday night that had at least 4, if not 6 sitcoms on the air, 8:30, 9:30, almost always those 4 half hours were sitcoms. And then you started to have a reality show took 1 hour, or a Dateline news type of show. And then our dramas started to take up the 9 p.m. slot. And, there just wasn't room for the traditional half-hour sitcom. I think a lot of people think that they're dated. There's a misconception, I think, about sitcoms. I hear the whole canned laughter thing. Yeah, there's a laugh track, but it's real people laughing out in the audience. It's very authentic because you are putting on a play for them and just simply shooting it. So there are microphones up in the audience and they're recording real laughter, but that is different from even single camera sitcoms where you don't have an audience. And I think people started to think of that as kind of old fashioned. Multicam is, almost always done on a sound stage, but I don't know. I got to disagree. I think that, first of all, people want to laugh. People need to laugh, especially these days. And, there's also the syndication factor and the global, reality and news shows only go so far. But you take a show like Frasier or like Big Bang Theory, they play around the world. The global markets are so important. And you really don't get that with other kinds of programming. Really, basically, it's scripted programming that gets the global eyeballs. So hopefully, things will come around. Everybody says it's circular. I don't think it'll ever be the glory days of sitcoms anymore, where there were so many on the air. But it would be nice to see more genuinely funny ones. That's the other thing. So many. There's such great ideas out there for shows, and you run into walls because it might be a new idea or a newer writer that comes up with it, and studios and networks are so risk averse that they want to go with only the type of show that succeeded, only the actor that succeeded before, only the people that have succeeded before, and so you tend to get the same stuff. And it becomes boring. How many, after Friends was a success, how many shows ripped off the Friends type of premise and tried to succeed? And they didn't. They never became as successful. But there were a lot for those who weren't around then. So, I don't know. I miss the days of sitcoms and people going to the set and, actually actually working on a sitcom is so fun. I'm pretty much retired from sitcom directing at this point, by choice, and by situation, because there aren't that many out there. But I had a good run, and I really enjoyed my sitcom life.
So where did the run start from? I know you went to USC, and I believe you were on a debate team. I speech and
I
debate.
was.
Okay, so I always wonder, how does someone become a director? I know, I know guys like when Philadelphia, I knew, I did stand up comedy, and I had some friends who were going to film school at Temple, and Adam McKay, I used to hang out with him. He went to Temple, and he wanted to be a writer. That was his goal. But another kid, Chris Mancini, wanted to be a director, and so, but you didn't see a lot of guys and women who were like saying, "Hey, I'm going to be a director," at least not in Philadelphia. When did you decide to be a director? Because what was your major at USC?
First of all, for those wondering how to break into the business, everyone's path is different. I've been asked versions of this question since I got into the business. How'd you get in? How can I get in? What's the path? There is no set path. Everybody has their own way in. And a lot of it is luck. A lot of it is actually who you know. And a lot of it is talent. So if you have the trifecta of those three, then ideally you can make a career in this town. I'm very fortunate that I was able to. I was, however, considered one of the pioneers as a female director. But when I started directing, I had people say, literally say to me, "You're never going to make it. Don't quit being an assistant director." Because, first of all, I got my first shot directing on Frasier, and people were like, "Oh, well, a show always gives it an episode to direct as a gift for their long-running assistant director." And, that may very well be true, but that doesn't mean I didn't do a bang-up job and don't deserve more. And I ended up getting nominated for that first episode. So they kind of had to give me more. And I had a nice rollout on that show, but it took me, a few years before I could quit being an AD and make a living as a director. But to go back to the beginning, I went to USC. I did not go to the film school. I was a double major, business comm and print journalism. And so I was in the Annenberg School at USC. But my college job, I was a tour guide at Universal Studios all through college. So can you tell I talk? And so I was surrounded during my college years by people who wanted to be in the business, and some of whom had already started, working in the business. And, you become enamored, you become a little competitive, it's like, I want to do that. And showbiz kind of sucked me in. I used my journalism major as an opportunity to go and interview people at Universal down on the lower lot. The tour was based on the upper lot of the studio, if you know the layout, and then the trams would go down into the lower lot. So I had access to the lot, and I would line up interviews with people like Walter Hill and his AD team, and Joel Silver, and people were very generous. People like to talk about themselves. So it was fun getting interviews, and that further pushed my psyche into the showbiz realm. But I was an Air Force brat. I was born in Europe. I lived all over, for years, finally settled up in San Francisco. And I came to USC not having really ever spent any time in Los Angeles, and certainly not even an extended family and or friends did I have anybody that worked in show business up until I started working at Universal and going to USC. So it's not like I had the connections at all. It's really remarkable that I was able to make a full career out of it. But I always did well in school. And the Directors Guild of America, the DGA, offers a training program once a year. And it's very selective. It's very competitive. And the way you get into the training program now is different than when I went through. So when I went through, you had to take an 8-hour aptitude test. It was all sorts of things that have nothing to do with film. It was 10 uses for a sock. Use these geometric shapes to do this or whatever. And, I guess some stuff could be translated into getting shots or organization, things like that. But and at the end of that long test, there was one of those Myers-Briggs personality tests. I guess they wanted to make sure you weren't some psychopath. Like, psychopaths don't exist in Hollywood. But so I took that test. They interviewed the top 100 scores out of about 2,000. So I was always a good test taker. And I remember in my interview, it was the first day of the 1987 DGA strike is when my interview to become a DGA trainee was held. And so I didn't have the full panel of interviewers that normally was there. I had the woman who ran the program and a couple of old guys. One of them, Wallace Worsley, had been the AD, the second AD on The Wizard of Oz. And they looked at me, and the one question I remember was, so do you really want to be an actress? It was so insulting. It's like, no, I'm here to become a DGA trainee. I'm here to become a member of the Directors Guild, to work in production and to make movies and TV shows. I had no desire to be in front of the camera at any point. But, I was this little blonde and, they just assumed, when that's what women's choices were back then. And there weren't even that many female ADs at that point in time. That's changed. There's really a good parity in the AD world, but not yet in directors. So I got into the training program. It's a 2-year training program where the DGA chooses the shows that you work on. So you get a variety of training, from sitcoms to hour episodic, the TV hour shows, to movies in town, movies out of town. There were a lot of TV movies back then. All the major broadcast networks had their TV movies, and they were all shot in the States. It was before everything moved to Canada. And so I got training in how to work on all of those with a bunch of different people, and those were my new connections. And so when you graduate the training program, they kind of kick you out and say, have fun with your career. You're now a member of the DGA, and you can only work as an assistant director until you get this many days as a second AD. And then after a certain amount of days working as a second, you're eligible to be hired as a first AD. And then after a certain amount of days as a first AD, you're eligible to be hired as a production manager, a UPM. And that's the career that a lot of ADs did. Some of the ADs in my training class and there were only 8 of us who passed that year and made it into the program. And some of them are still ADing on, big movies and have had a glorious career as an assistant director. And I loved being an AD, probably the military brat in me, but I really loved being an AD. What made me want to direct, because, unlike a lot of people working in the business, I did not grow up even thinking that I would be working in this business. I wanted to be a politician of all god-awful things, and a lawyer. So I started out in pre-law in this cluster at USC with a poli-sci major before I switched to journalism. And so I didn't grow up wanting to even be in the business. But when I got to know the business and fell in love with the business, and was able to make a career in the business because my phone kept ringing and I kept getting work, I started to realize I could grow within this business. And it was when I got into sitcoms, and me getting into sitcoms is also kind of a funny story. I had dabbled in sitcoms, in between movies. I had done only TV movies and features for the first few years of me being an assistant director, and I loved that. But I would do, sitcoms during this, whenever things would slow down. And I spent a couple of years on a show with Diane English called Love and War, and it was a lot of fun. But then when that went down, I went off and did movies and stuff. And I remember when I got a call for Frasier, I was actually working on a TV movie at the time, and so I came over. On a lunch break or something and met with the Frasier people. It was the same week I got a call to be part of Clint Eastwood's team on the Bridges of Madison County. So all of a sudden I found myself with two different worlds saying, do you want to come play with us? So I have a big feature with a big director, or I have it wasn't even a hit sitcom at that point. It was the end of the first season on Frasier. I started on the second season, and so it was before award season. So it hadn't won any Emmys whatsoever. Nobody knew what the juggernaut that it would become. But it was a lot of great people, and a lot of people. I had done one day on Cheers. That's how they knew me. I filled in for somebody on Cheers when they went out on location. And they needed an AD to work out on location, and that's how I got connected with them. It's crazy how that happens. And I ended up choosing Frasier, and all of my single camera friends, all the friends I had that were working in movies and TV movies and hour TV, they were like, "Oh, you're going soft. What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm not going soft. I want to go to work and laugh every day. I like the longevity of TV shows, I like we're working from August up until March, April, May, and it's more. I also was tired of. I barely remember my 20s for a variety of reasons. One of them being I was working 16, 18-hour days, a lot on location, and you just had to live for your job. And being on a sitcom, it's a 5-day week schedule. We did 3 and 1, 3 weeks working, 1 week paid off. That's so the writers could catch up on their writing. And that was the schedule for all sitcoms, 3 weeks on, 1 week off, but you got paid for the week off. And the hours were reasonable. You could have a life. If I had wanted kids, I could have had kids. I didn't want them, but it opened up a lot more options other than work. To go into sitcoms, but I got so much crap from my single camera friends for going soft. And then after a few years working on Frasier, I found that, because that's a show that used a lot of new directors to the format. They'd use a lot of theater directors who'd never been around cameras before. So I found myself on some of the shows like almost co-directing with these brand new directors to the sitcom world. And I wasn't giving direction to the actors, but I was helping them with every other aspect. And, and when Kelsey directed the first few years, he was not all Kelsey, shall we say. And so, the cast would even say, "That was a great episode last night, Katy, well done." And it wasn't even my name as a director. But so I thought, why am I not getting paid to do this job that I know I can do? But moving from an AD to a director, the big question is, but can she talk to actors? And, I didn't have a problem giving direction to actors, but they didn't know that. And that ended up being something that I kind of became known for. And I would go on shows. I remember I did this show called Sullivan and Son for TBS, and Christine Ebersol, who I love, a big theater actress, she's just wonderful. And so I went in on a meeting for this show, and believe me, I got this so many times. I could have a long list of shows where I got the same thing in meetings. When they were meeting me, to see if they wanted me to come and direct, it was, we've never had a woman director. So we're just not sure how everyone's going to react. And, or they'd say, oh, we had a woman director and it didn't really work out. And so, we're really hesitant. It's like, are you kidding me? So what? The next man that comes in that doesn't work out, where you're gonna now hire monkeys or something? It's like, first of all, we're not all the same. Second of all, you don't give us as many opportunities, so we don't even get to practice our craft as much as the other guys do. And it's like, give us a chance. And fortunately, enough people gave me a chance that I could have a full career. But Sullivan and Son, I go into direct. It's Vince Vaughn and Peter Billingsley are the two executive producers, with Steve Byrne, the actor. It was a boys' show. There were, the guys who interviewed me, it was a room full of men. It's often been a room full of men where I'm the only female, whether it's a meeting or, a production meeting type of situation. And it went great. It went super great. And I did a great job because I know what I'm doing. And Christine Ebersol pulled me aside one night, one day after rehearsal, and she goes, I just have to tell you, it is so nice to finally work with an actor's director. And I got it. That was like the biggest compliment. That's one of, like, if somebody said, what are the highlight moments of your career? It was, one of them was Christine Ebersol calling me an actor's director. And I just took such pride in that,
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Sullivan and Son. And I don't know what episode you directed, but when I first started dating my wife, she would fly in from New Jersey. And I knew Gary Cannon, who was the warm-up guy for Sullivan and Son.
I know Gary really well.
Yeah, I'm friends with Gary.
Right up the hill from me.
Okay, well, I know Gary. So Gary, I had been doing the Cooper Talk show in the studio in Burbank, and Gary was my guest. And he had me and my now wife go, and I still have the Sullivan and Son T-shirt, and he gave my wife Joanne a script. And I don't know if it was because I believe there was a woman directing. It may have been your show, but I remember. Okay,
so I'll tell you when it was. It went so well that Steve Byrne, the star of the show, and the EPs, and Vince Vaughn at the wrap party were all like, you were awesome. We, next year we want you to do, like at least every other episode. This happened to me several times in my career. It's so devastating. And then lo and behold, the network TBS was taken over by a new guy, and he canceled all the previous guys' shows. They didn't want to do comedy anymore, so the show got canceled. But I ended up we didn't know it at the time. I thought it was going to be like the second or third show till the end. They ended up moving it. It turned out so well, and it was so sweet that they ended up moving it to be the series finale. So I directed the last episode of Sullivan and Son. What would be the last episode?
Now, you mentioned some other shows. What were some of the other shows that happened to you that you said you
Titus I did an episode of Titus that went super great, and that was another really super
actually, funny you say Titus, because I went to a taping of that because...
You did? That was done totally different than any other sitcom.
Well, my friend did warm up for a little bit. His name was Neil Boble, and he was a real tall guy, and actually he knew Titus really well. He ended up doing more, but we went for a taping, and it was completely different because they would do the interstitials, and that was a great show.
Mm-hmm. It was a real great show. And Christopher Titus, bless his heart, that was one of the shows. That was the show that I went in on for the meeting, and they said, we tried a woman director and it didn't work out. So they had to have me meet with Christopher Titus himself. And, you mentioned earlier you're a big SC football fan. It's like, yeah, I'm a total sports girl. Football, I'm an NBA freak. Go Knicks, go Clippers. I'm not a Lakers fan, but, so Clippers and Knicks are my teams. And, and football and baseball, love the Mets and the Dodgers. And so Christopher and I ended up talking about sports. And I had at that point in time, it wasn't my main car, but I had a 68 Mustang that I had restored. that I got in high school, and I was not the original owner. I'm not that old, but it was a beautiful car, and I know a thing or two about cars. And so we talked cars and football and sports and in our meeting. And Christopher's like, "Great, can't wait for you to come work with us." And but people have such preconceived notions of a woman coming into direct, that she's going to be so different and whatever. So Titus, that happened with it. And for those who aren't familiar, not many people I think now are familiar with that show, but we would pre-shoot, I can't remember what day of the week we shot, maybe a Tuesday, with the audience. And so Monday we'd go out and pre-shoot all of these little interstitial scenes, mini scenes and flashbacks, and sometimes they were just quick cuts that would go in between the main scenes that were shot in front of the audience. So we would go out on location and shoot these little scenes. We had special sets where we'd shoot these little scenes. And so on show, they did 2 shows, which is, I rarely ever did this. It's kind of old school before me, where they shoot a show in the afternoon and break and go fix all the, do any rewriting they wanted to do from that show, and then do a second show at night. Not many shows do that. They usually will shoot just one show at night, and we'll just do 2 passes or more of each scene. But that show shot in the afternoon and in the evening. And when we would do the show, from the moment I said action, I did not say cut until the end of the episode. There was no end of scenes, moving on to the next scene. It was almost done like live. And it could have aired live the way we did it. So I'd say action, and then we'd, start the scene. It would be like in the living room or the kitchen. And then I'd say freeze. And the actors literally would freeze in their spots. And we would run the clip on the TV screens that the audience can see of what the scene, the interstitial that we'd shot the previous day for them. And then I would say action again as soon as that was done, and they just carry on. And it was a really nerve-wracking show because it was kind of like live all the way through. And to remember to say freeze and then action again, like right on the moments, so it could be seamless, it was fun. It was absolutely fun. And the energy after the end of the show, it's like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. And so thank God there was a meal break in between shows and a bar after the second show. But it was so fun, and my episode went so great. And that show meant a lot to me. When I watch, I've got a copy of it, and when I watch it, it ends up bringing me to tears because my mom had passed not long before I had shot that show, within the last couple of years. And it was really a traumatic experience. And this episode that I did was all about Christopher's long-lost mom coming to visit him. It was Connie Stevens. Stacy Keach played his dad. And, so it was, we had big actors on set. And it was an episode that kind of revealed that his mom had passed away. And the scenes that he had with her were kind of all, as I recall, like made up in his head or something. Anyway, I told them about something that had happened with my mom and her passing and my interactions with her, and they incorporated it into the episode beautifully. And I think I even went up to the writer's room and told them this whole story. And so when I see that episode, the ending part of it is exactly what happened with me and my mom. And so it's, you have those moments. How many other professions can you have those type of moments in? It's, working in this business is just so special when, especially when you're on, movies last a few months and then everybody disperses. You get used to this family and then they go away. But to work on a series and with people who have worked together for a long time already And, you know, a lot of times it was awkward me coming in as the only new person. I was like the substitute teacher coming in to direct. But, you know, the sitcom environment is such a family style environment. You really are on the stage all together making the show. So it's creative and everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing and where they're supposed to be. And it's an exciting process. And having worked on a show for 10 years, you know, I spent 10 years on Frasier. It's like, they became my family, like literally members of my family, where I would travel with them. I'm still best friends with my second AD when I was the first, and then he moved up to be first when I started directing, with his wife. It was the three of us would travel, and Mark, my second, you've probably seen his name in the credits, Mark Sturtevant, the most wonderful human being who ever lived, and a great partner in crime. He was 14 years older than I was, and I didn't hire him the first opportunity that I had because I thought people would, you know, go to him instead of me because I was like, you know, this young blonde chick, and it's like, you know, who's going to listen to her? They're going to go straight to him, and that was a big mistake on my part. And once we became partners in the it was the fourth season of Frasier, he came on, and he stayed till the end, and we just became family. And Mark passed away a few years ago, but I'm having dinner tomorrow night with his widow and their two daughters, who are like my little sisters. And it's like, what other kind of business? It's, you know, where you're working with such creative people and so many of them on show to show to show to show. It's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. There's bad parts of this business too.
How would you go about, you know, show from show? How does a director, in your case, do they call you and say, "Hey, Katy, we saw this work," or is it networking where you sit there and you know someone who wrote for this show? Because I know with a lot of writers, I know that's what happened. They know someone.
That's what happened on Sullivan and Son. Is that I had left the business for a period of time to go run a nonprofit, and for literally like 3 or 4 years. And this was a couple of Frasier writers who did not know that I had kind of left the business, and they called me to direct Sullivan and Son. So I hadn't directed in almost 4 years when I did that show, and it's like, whoa, I really do love this business. I need to get back into it. And so I kind of had a second career after the nonprofit, which was remarkable. But I had let go of my agent. I didn't have an agent when Sullivan and Son called. So I used my now deceased ex-husband's agent, and I stayed with him for a couple of years. But getting shows as a director, your first episode is likely going to be through people that you know. Most of the episodes I got were through people that I knew, writers that I'd worked with that were producing a new show. In television, just so the audience knows, I'm sure your other guests have talked about this, it's more of a writer's medium than a director's medium. The director, the shorter the format, the more involved the writers are. So we had writers on stage with us, giving notes and watching our run-throughs and watching the scenes. Whereas if you get to a feature, the director is king or queen, and you rarely even have the writer come to set. They're off doing something else at that point. And TV movies are the same way. But in sitcoms, the writers are the creators, and they are the constant entity on the show. And directors, some shows would use house directors. It was the producer's prerogative, whether they had a house director like Jimmy Burrows, who I considered a mentor. That was another of my favorite moments. When I got nominated, he was the first person to call and congratulate me, so that was kind of thrilling. But he's a legend in this world, and I'm not exaggerating. He's a legend, and he's someone who house directs almost always. He did every single episode of Will and Grace, for instance. They never had a guest director come in. He did a bulk of the first season of Frasier, but then Friends came on, and he wanted to launch that show. That came on our second year. I still remember him at the podium where we had the phone on stage, calling in after the Friends premiere night the next morning and asking how the ratings for it were. Do I have a hit on my hands? Is it going to be a good show? And it's like, yeah, the ratings were good enough to keep it around for a while. And the rest is history. But most of the shows you're going to get are through people that you know. A lot of them. But then once you start working a lot, your resume starts speaking for you. And so I did a lot of meetings where it's and as a director in TV, so many people have to approve who's directing. And every studio has a list. They like to say they don't, but they do. I've actually had people say, oh, yeah, you were on the list. Let's meet with, come and meet with us. And so that was, I think, a CBS list for that particular show. But you start going on general meetings, you start to know the executives and the studio personnel, and they may recommend you, or they may say to the producers, we'd like her to come in and direct. I guess I benefited because I was a woman, but it was also a huge detriment to my career because there would be 22 episodes. And this, if you look at my IMDb even, on a lot of shows, there's like a handful of episodes, and that's because sexism in the business. There would be 22 episodes of a show, and 2 episodes would go to females. And I was glad to be one of the 2 or to get both of them, but that's all that they allotted for women. And if you went back and looked at the, who directed every season of sitcoms back then, there's not very many women. And each production schedule of 22 episodes of shows, I was happy to be the token, but I was well aware of it and, constantly hoping things would change. And I think they have a little bit, but not that much. And statistics would bear that out. So, there's still a long way to go. I remember asking a friend of mine if he had been booked on a certain show, and his comment was, they're still looking for their woman. I'm like, okay, wow, what a thing to say to me, and it just happened. So I also had an agent, and it took me a little bit to get an agent. I literally had VHS copies of my first episode on Frasier that I literally put in manila envelopes and mailed them out to, people at different agencies that, like, people on Frasier had recommended, send it to him or send it to, this agency or whatever. And, I'm looking for representation. This is my 1 episode of Frasier. And finally I got a bite. And it was through recommendations. This particular agent had represented other people on Frasier and worked a lot with the studio executives at Paramount. And so I went with an agent named Rob Rothman. And great guy, great agency. I ended up, I'd like to say I was somebody who stuck with their agent their entire career, but, because I was usually a small fish in a big pond at agencies because I directed sitcoms, and I really had no desire to direct in single camera because it's just a different lifestyle. I was a woman getting the token jobs in sitcoms. I wasn't bringing in the big bucks, as they say, for agencies. So you tend to be a smaller fish. So I switched agents a few times. After Rothman, when my career started taking off, I got a call from CAA, and I met with them, and I ended up being with CAA for about 8 years. Again, in a small fish in a huge pond. And then I left the business to go run that nonprofit and came back and didn't have an agent, used my ex-husband's at Gersh and stayed with him for a little while. And then that agent moved to Wisconsin, and now I'm with IAG. But again, I'm still repped there, but I'm really not directing. I'm writing now. I've moved into writing.
Well,
so
I was going to ask you, why did you leave to start the nonprofit? What was, because your career was going well. I mean, but so that's a big. I mean, you were already established. You were established. So what made you decide?
I'm a firm believer in doing volunteer work. And I remember back in the day, Jane Pauley, who was a morning show newswoman, she had said that people who do volunteer work are like 50% more likely to be able to start a second career. And that was the case with me. So work has started to slow down. This was the mid-aughts. And so there were less and less sitcoms, still challenging for a woman. And I'm looking down the road and I'm like, how long am I going to be able to survive on a half a dozen episodes, or even less in a season? Because there's just not that many of them. And so I started thinking about plan Bs, and it just kind of, I had done a lot of volunteer work with the I Have a Dream Foundation, and all of a sudden they were looking for a new CEO, a new executive director, and their headhunter contacted me as somebody who was familiar with the organization, that had done a lot of work with them. And I was friends with members of the board, and they knew I was batting around the idea of a second career, or a different career. And I was exploring law school at that point. I was also going through the process of applying to law schools, and believe it or not, the Foreign Service, and which was a lengthy process, and all these paths I could have taken. And I ended up running this nonprofit for about 3.5 years, and then got a call for Sullivan and Son. And running a nonprofit is a huge 24/7 endeavor, and fundraising and asking people for money and putting on events and dealing with a board, and much less all the children and my program directors. And so it was a really exhausting job. The burnout rate is pretty high in executive directors of nonprofits. And so I kind of reached that point. I got asked back into the show business life, and I took it. And, Sullivan and Son led to Two Broke Girls, led to Fuller House, led to all sorts of shows that I was able to do in this, second chapter of directing. So I was very fortunate. And I am very grateful for the time I had with I Have a Dream. I loved the kids. I loved working with the kids, and it's an educational foundation for at-risk youth. And so I was spending my days not in Hollywood anymore. I spent them going from Watts to Boyle Heights, out to Inglewood, and that was where my work was. So it was a completely different lifestyle. It was good though, because it gave me perspective on the business that I thought I had grown tired of.
Now, I was going to say, do you ever think, you mentioned earlier about when you're a director, you're going into it's a new surrounding when you're a guest director. Do you think it helped you that you were a Air Force brat because you were used to going into a new school? Because I talked to some actors who say that, it's like anything. I went to the same school, same elementary school, same junior, same high school, and then some guys from my high school went to my college. It was all in New Jersey. But do you think that helped you, when you go into because you have that, I did this when I was a kid. This is easy now. And do you ever think that helped you because you did jump around a lot when you were younger?
I'm sure that factored in. I'm sure. I think the biggest asset to going from show to show is having a sense of humor. Because you do get comments, and you're dealing with, mostly you're telling a lot of guys what to do on the crew. And I think that being a military brat gave me, the daughter of an Air Force captain, the a certain strength because of the lifestyle. And the I don't want to say militant, but I remember David Angel, may he rest in peace. He was he and his wife Lynn were on Flight 11 at 9/11. On 9/11, they were on that very first flight that crashed into the building. He had come up to me actually the year before at our premiere party, and we had already shot a couple of episodes, and I had mentioned on set something about being a military brat. And he came up to me and he's like, "That explains so much." And I'm like, "What do you mean by that?" He's like, "No, you're our rock." And I just, that's one of the other moments I treasure. It meant a lot to me. Now, being a showy rock,
That's a lot, yeah, because you always sit there, and you always hear, like, when a show's been on for a long time, the crew, as you said, the crew, it's like family. When you were Frasier. Yeah. And when you leave that and you start going to these new shows, it's not like, oh, here's Katy. It's like, we have a director for this episode. So it must be hard. And as you said, for also being a woman. Because, and you're not only dealing with a lot of males, but you're dealing with a lot of males, like with the actors who make a lot of money. So it's that with an ego. So that must be hard sometimes. Because once again, I deal with a lot of businesses around here in my area, and you think like women in business, it would have changed, but it hasn't a lot. Like I see it. I mean, I run a big networking event, and sometimes I'll do a all female sponsors, and we'll do a female nonprofit, and I've had guys hit on girls at my event, and that pisses me off. I'm like, no, this is a business event, man. This isn't singles night. But this is in 2026, so I'm guessing from when as you said, there wasn't a lot of women. It must have been some. Yeah,
comments times like that are not rare. Are not rare. They're quite common, and it's a way of putting a woman in her place and disrespecting her. Which is done sometimes with compliments. I was walking to set. I was directing a show in Toronto, and I was walking to set with the EP, who was just a despicable human being, but I had to play the game and play nice. And so we're walking to set, we're talking, and he looks over at me and he goes, "You got a nice rack." I'm like, what do I say to that? How inappropriate is that to say? And yet they don't think anything of it. And it's whether they are aware of it or not, it's a matter of them, showing this is how much they respect women. This is what they think of them. And this is what you're thinking of when you're with me. You're not acknowledging me as a director. You're acknowledging me only as, whatever. But I will say, going on to a new show where I didn't know a lot of people, which happened after you work in the business for a while, there was really not a crew that I had not worked with, because crew people go from show to show to show to show too. So I knew all the camera guys, all the DPs, grip and electric. I had worked with a lot of, I usually have worked with at least some of them on a show, but not necessarily any of the writers, not necessarily any of the cast, usually not any of the cast, and sometimes not the ADs. And I never went into a show cold, not once in my entire career. I always made a point of spending at least a day, at least a couple of hours, by the end. It's not like I was shadowing and I needed to learn how to do anything. I just wanted to see, I always went in to visit, meet as many people as I could, get the intros out of the way, meet the cast. Hey, I'm coming in next week. Oh, great. We're looking forward to it. Blah. Have the niceties. And so I wouldn't be that completely unfamiliar when I showed up on day one. They'd already met me. So I'd spend time on set. I'd meet the ADs. And I also was able to observe, which is hugely important, who runs the show. Is it the showrunner? Like on Two Broke Girls, Michael Patrick King, who, and I'm not embarrassed to say this, I hope never to see again in my entire life, and I'm not alone in this. He ran that show for better or worse, and a lot of directors said they wouldn't work on that show, and I left after doing 4 or 5 episodes and told my agent I never want to go back there again. And I had words with Michael before I left, but he ran the show, and you had to do everything down to the last little thing exactly like he wanted it. So it was very stifling. And, but then I go to direct George Lopez, and George kind of runs the show there. And, big personality and, big star of the show. So sometimes sometimes it's everybody doing their job and working together beautifully. But, usually there's somebody that is really and not necessarily in a negative way, but somebody that really is in charge. And it's not always the showrunner, the head writer, executive producer. It's not always them. Sometimes it's the actor. You also learn I also learned by going in advance how they liked to rehearse. Some actors like to rehearse a lot. Some are like, let's go. We don't really need to rehearse that much. That was how it was a lot on Frasier. We had a very well-oiled machine, and Kelsey and the gang, they were theater actors. They knew they were going to perform great. They didn't need much direction. They welcomed it, and they welcomed a discussion of the scenes, which was lovely. But it was all about, let's get done, let's go home, let's give the writers, time to do whatever tweaks they need to do on the script, and we'll see you tomorrow. So that show went very fast. Some shows really like to rehearse. And, whereas Frasier would be done by 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon sometimes on rehearsal days, other shows would go until 5, 6, 7 because the actors and the writers would come down. They really wanted to flesh out everything. So you have to go in. You can't go in cold, I don't think, to a show. You have to know what the dynamics are with the personalities, with the schedule, with who's going to be your person on set. It's not always the AD that you can rely on. In fact, a lot of the problem areas, I think, with people, I like to think I got along with most everybody, but the tense relationships more often than not were with the ADs or the camera coordinators, who were called technical coordinators, camera coordinators, associate directors, whatever. They basically coordinated the cameras. But I liked to do my own cameras and set the shots with them. There was often tense moments with either that position or the assistant director because they were the ones that wanted to direct. And they thought by me coming in as this token woman, I was taking away their opportunity. Or they were jealous. I came from being an AD. Why, and I'm directing, and I have a directing career, and I don't AD anymore. And so, sometimes the AD or, the camera coordinator or sometimes the editor, I only had that once or twice, but would think that they should be in the director's chair. And so they weren't necessarily helpful. And they certainly weren't necessarily doing right by me, because the better I looked, the less chance they had of getting those token slots that were available. And again, this was by far not the norm. I'm just thinking of a few experiences that I had. I love my ADs and my AD teams, 99% of the time, and my editors, and it's been a great relationship. But you have to know going into a show what the experience is probably going to be like for you to be able to do a good job once you get there.
Now, you said you're semi-retired, and you're not.
Yeah.
But do you miss it? that's the thing. I know you said you're writing, but do you miss the hustle and the bustle of the set, the directing? Is it something that, or is it something that you did it so much that you're enjoying not dealing with the stress and dealing with the drama and dealing with the politics?
I would say I'm enjoying not having that stress. But I do, there are things that I miss, sure, about the business. And I am grateful every day for the ride, for the journey that I've had. So grateful. And I'm so grateful that I came up in a period of time, in the period of time that I did, where there were a lot of sitcoms, where there were opportunities for new people that don't exist now. You know, I taught directing at the USC Cinema School for 5 years, graduate and undergraduate students. And I quit a couple of years ago. And one of the reasons was it was hard for me to be encouraging about the business because it's so different now than it used to be. And, you know, it's tougher, I think, in so many regards, to make a name in the business now. So I'm just grateful that I had the journey that I did because I had a wonderful ride as a director and as an assistant director, and I loved the job when I was doing it. And, you know, not every show I didn't love every show, but I loved the job itself. And when it did click, like I worked on one show that, oh God, COVID was another thing that killed audiences shows. That was like the final, you know, nail in the coffin because when shows started to come back, they didn't have audiences, you know, because too many people sitting next to each other. I directed one show during COVID. I directed the series finale of the Punky Brewster reboot. And it was in the height of COVID. We had to go every morning to get tested on the other side of the lot at like 6 a.m. and get our results back before we were even allowed on set. And we had to direct behind a screen. They had my desk screened in, even though I didn't really direct from the desk. And I had to wear not only a mask, but a shield, as did the cast. How do you direct comedy with all that stuff? You know, it was ridiculous. But, you know, and then once production, like I said, started coming back, you know, sitcoms were the last to come back, and they just didn't come back in force. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about it that I miss. But, you know, I'm still, once a creative, always a creative. And I started writing. I've had a lot of success in writing in just the last year or so, a little over a year. I started writing with a partner, and our first 2 scripts have been taken out by pretty good production companies. We got a 5-series development deal for vertical formats recently. So I've actually already been paid as a writer on multiple projects. And we are getting into my writing partner and I are getting into a new format, you know, another new format called verticals, which is filmmaking for the phone. Instead of 16:9, it's 9:16. And it's, you know, shows that are serialized for your phones. And they're the next billion-dollar industry that's coming to Hollywood. So I'm glad to be in on the get-go there. And writing is fun, you know. It's all storytelling. You know, if you're a storyteller, you're a storyteller. And, you know, writing is fun. It's flexing new muscles. And, you know, I flexed the old ones to death. And so now, I'm doing something new, and it's super fun. And because I'm, like, kind of retired, and I'm very fortunate that I can say that I'm retired and support myself well, it's almost like a fun hobby that I'm doing all the time. And because the pressure's not on. I'm not like, I gotta get a paycheck. I gotta keep working. I gotta, you know, it's all for fun. So there's a lot less stress than going to sets and having to please the studio and the network and the writers and the actors and do a good job while maintaining your integrity and providing your own creativity in the process. It's a lot, you know.
This has been great. I always end with this question, and you touched on it a little bit, but looking back at your career, because you've had a great career, now you're starting a second career, as you said, writing. what are a few things that really make you proud? I know you mentioned like with David Angel and things like that, saying, and Christine Nebersol saying you're an actor's director. I'm sorry. What are just a few things that make you really proud, looking back at what you've done and what your career's been?
I think the biggest thing that I'm proud of is that was able, from my early 20s until I retired, that I was able to make a living in this business. That I was able to survive. I mean, I'm really proud of that. I didn't come from showbiz. I didn't know anything about it. So I really started from scratch and had to learn things along the way. Sometimes I learned the hard way. And do I have regrets? There are things I wish I had done differently. Interactions, perhaps, that I wish I had handled differently. Choices I've made that, it's like you always wonder about the road not traveled. But I'm proud that I was in a position to be able to make choices. And I'm proud of the work that I did on most shows. I know I contributed a lot to Frasier. I know I did. And I know I contributed a lot to Sid the Science Kid. Bradley Zweig, the writer, and he was the only writer, he worked very closely with the directors, and he would send us the advanced script and ask for our notes. And so I got to contribute to writing on that show. And that was such an honor for me, because you don't, other than little suggestions you can make to the writers on sitcoms, they really don't welcome that from directors. But Bradley did, and it was just, I felt like I was doing something great for kids and a quality programming, because not all of the shows I did, will I brag about, because they were kind of schlocky, and it's like, that was challenging sometimes. I'd get a script, I'm like, where exactly is this supposed to be funny? Like, what can I do to make this funnier, or not all sitcoms were super funny. I'm really proud that I was able to work on a show like Frasier and like Sid, and that I got to work with people like, when I was doing single camera, like Blake Edwards, I worked with Sylvester Stallone, and I did a Star Trek movie. And, I can say that Jimmy Burrows was one of my mentors. It was just a lot of great timing. And, if you read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, he talks about the fact that so much of it is timing. When you enter a career, when you enter your time to contribute. And I don't know, I think that the timing of it, my perseverance. There was a producer on Frasier who really wanted to direct, and she did not get the opportunity. And she said to me once, "Well, if I was as pushy as you are," it's like, I want to say, F you, It's like, it's just because I declare that I want to direct and that I want to do more episodes, for some reason that's being pushy. But you know what? It worked. I got more episodes. So, you do you, I'll do me, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'm proud that I was able to make a life in this business. It's not an easy life.
No.
Working freelance, every time I'd finish a show, I thought, oh God, the phone's not going to ring again. This could be the end of everything. And, so it's a constant, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? How much do I have to budget in order to have indefinite time off? You never know what's going to happen. And I'm very proud of the fact that I'm very security conscious. And I always had like a plan B, like I said, the nonprofit doing volunteer work. It was never about, I need a bigger house. I need this, I need that. It's like, no, I love, my smaller place. I have nice cars. I travel. That's where I want to, and I save. I save for the rainy days and for retirement. And I'm glad I had that sensibility. Because I know people who like lost homes during the like the COVID break and stuff, and for whatever reason. But I'm really, I didn't have kids. That helps, money wise. But I guess I'm just proud of the life I was able to make.
Well, that's been awesome. This has been great. People, go look up Katy on IMDb and go watch her past shows. Go to my website, coopertalk.net. You can find 1,060 episodes. I don't know, somewhere around there. You can email me at coopertalk.net. Also, go to YouTube. Look up, I host a podcast called Lawsuits and Lessons with my lawyer friend John Foggerholm. We talk with some his friends from LA and San Antonio who are entrepreneurs, and my friends from New Jersey who are entrepreneurs. So go follow that. Also, if you're in the Philadelphia area, on Friday, May 29th, I'll be headlining a new comedy club called Brickies. It's in Sewell, New Jersey, in Suite 10. So if you're interested, hit me up with an email, coopertalk.net, and I will send you the link to get tickets. Anyway, look up Katy. Keep listening to my show.
I had a podcast, by the way. It's still out there if they want to hear more of my silly voice.
And what's it called?
It's called Mojo Girl Madness. It was my COVID project because I had to do something creative during COVID. So Mojo Girl Madness.
Look up Mojo Girl Madness. Listen to that and listen to Cooper Talk. And it's a whole night of listening. Remember, I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guests. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I'll talk to you next time.